This is House Planning Help, episode 344. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Janice Gardiner, and we're going to be looking at her award-winning project. This is quite a good example if you think of grand designs and how there can be drama in a project. This is a no drama podcast today, just making you aware. And I thought before we begin, we ought to give another shout out to Josh, who is the project architect, Green Trace architect. And we've made this a little double. So if you haven't heard Josh's episode, maybe flick back to episode 343 before you listen to this one. I think it makes more sense in that order, just so you get some context from the city project to this out in the beautiful countryside. And Janice is, in fact, an ecologist. So what does an ecologist build? Well, we're going to find out all about her award-winning project, Hazel Passivhaus. I started by asking Janice to tell me how this all began.
Gosh, so wanting a change, as soon as children leave home, it's time to have an adventure. We weren't necessarily looking to build, we were just looking for a house in the countryside. Not a huge house, but ideally with a big garden or some land around. We started looking in Herefordshire, which wasn't too far away from Clevedon where we were. And we didn't find a house that fitted the bill, but eventually found this piece of land for sale. And when we came and looked at it, we fell in love with actually the field that's next to the building plot, which was just a sort of grassland field. So that started the next phase of our lives, really.
Maybe you could describe this site then.
So we're just about an acre in size. Where the house is built was the old pub garden. The pub's no longer a pub. And then behind us, we have a field that's just a grass and pasture field and a vegetable plot. We have 8 cider trees. We have a shed that we're renovating. And then the view to the front of the house is over an orchard and out to the hills behind. So very beautiful.
You've made it sound quite easy that you found this site. Was it like that, actually, that you really were looking at houses mainly? And
yes.
So being flexible has found you this site?
Yes, it was. It just happened to be there available in an area that we were looking. And we just sort of thought, why don't we have a look? We'd always looked at grand designs. We'd always watched it. We'd always thought, we'll never do anything like that. And I think it was just seeing it in a place that we were considering. We just thought, well, let's have a look and see what's possible.
What was the competition like then? Because often you can have a site and there can be 30 people all bidding.
Well, we were sort of in COVID, I think. We were sort of in between times. And when we came to see it, there was definitely, there's someone else interested. It's what we were given as a story. I don't think there was more than that, So it did mean that we acted fairly fast in terms of going for the plot and making a decision.
Did it have planning permission?
It did. So it had outline planning permission for a small house, maximum of 100 square metres internal floor space. And it's basically replacing a small chalet that had been originally an illegal dwelling, but eventually got planning permission. So it was to replace that, but not on the actual footprint of that. And they wanted it closer to the other houses in the road.
And what did you want from this house then? 100 square metres, was that ideal or, what?
Yes, I think it was fine because we were thinking of downsizing. We'd been in a Victorian terrace that had 4 bedrooms. It was really just mainly for the 2 of us, but with space for anyone who comes home. And we'd done up a Victorian terrace for sort of 20 years. So we were constantly looking after the house and making improvements. So I think there was this, we actually want a house that will look after us. And that's really, we wanted it to be eco. So that was one of our criteria to start with. My background's in nature conservation, so the environmental side and the ecology side was very much there. And because we knew we wanted an eco build, we started looking for architects that had those credentials. And actually, we didn't go to Josh directly, Green Trace Architects, to begin with. We went to someone that he worked with, and they recommended him. So we met here in a sort of rainy November day, and he had a look in the most appalling conditions, had a really good chat with us in the pub, and said it'll probably take you 2 years to get, not the year that you're thinking, it will be more like 2 years before you're in. And he was right. That was how long it took.
So was he your guide on what passes as ecological, or did you do a lot of other research?
And we already knew a little bit, because we were aware of things that we didn't think we could get to. We didn't think we'd manage to do Passivhaus certification. We didn't necessarily think we'd do solar panels. We wanted to, but we didn't think we could stretch to that. He was then our guide as to the method of construction, obviously the design of the house. But he did a really good feasibility study with us in terms of what it is we wanted, how we wanted to live, what our ethos was behind it. So he definitely guided that.
So what is on the brief?
So it was to be an eco home, so as ecological as we could afford. We wanted it to be modest and simple to live in, straightforward to live in, to have an element of joy and calmness about it, and also quite modern.
And is that something that's easy to tick off with a local planning department, or do you have a bit of a fight on your hands?
No, they took a long time to make decisions. One of the good things about the outline planning permission, they had just said a 2-bedroom house. They hadn't specified any design. So that was really handy for us, that we could actually go to them with the first time with the designs. We moved the house further back into the site to protect the large hazel tree at the front, and they accepted that. We didn't have any, I can't remember if there might have been tiny things we tweaked, but we didn't have any problems with getting planning permission for it.
So far, this is sounding like a nice, easy journey. This is good. I don't hear many of these stories. There's always something about to jump out of the woodwork in a minute.
No.
What build system then did you use for the house?
So it's a timber frame with the I-joists, and then it has wood fibre either side of that, blown cellulose within, and it's on the Isaquick raft, and then it's clad on the outside. Half of it's clad with tin and half of it's with cedar.
Is that driven a lot by wanting something more modern? Was that part of that decision making?
Well, that was in his design, so that was Josh's design from the beginning. When he first did black for the tin, I was, oh gosh, can I be that brave? And then as time went on, so actually grey's been used a lot in very urban settings, so actually let's go with the black, and we're very glad that we did. So no, that was where the design element really came in.
Yeah, I think it looks really striking, and even where we're recording this, we're looking at a round window. Are those easy to specify?
No, and Josh would have said that's probably an expensive thing to have. That was our daughter saying you need a feature window, and it does definitely work because of the way our drive comes round the back of the house. We're always approaching from the back, so the round window is a feature. And once you've thought about doing that, and Josh actually did try different shapes to see what he could get to work, and actually, no, the round, once you've got the idea, the round stays. The window is fine, and getting a round window, it's the green building store like all the other windows. The hardest bit is your surround, external surround for it, which our builders end up making out of wood and designing it themselves to get it to work.
Yeah, so it's just a bit of extra bespoke, making sure we don't ruin the airtightness.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's always tricky, isn't it, when you've got these decisions to make, because it does add a little bit of joy, and particularly with the cladding, I think it goes quite nicely. It's not a typical box in terms of if you're looking to really save money and keep it simple. So was that anything within the brief?
I think the straight A frame shape, as Josh explained, that would have been your simplest form and your cheapest form. he came up with the idea of lifting part of it to create this opening and this veranda. And once you've seen that, it's very hard to just say, oh no, we'll just go for the, So I think that is the thing that happens. You're on a creative journey with your architect and then with your builder. And some of the joy of that is doing those things rather than sticking with just what you said and just what the budget is maybe dictating. So I think your personality comes through in the decisions you make there.
What about the budget then? Presumably if you're downsizing, that makes it quite nice and easy. Were did you stick to what you wanted to?
No, we didn't stick to what we wanted to at all. And we were at a time when wood prices were skyrocketing. Everything went through the roof. But I would actually say we did stretch ourselves because we wanted to do. So the things that we said we can't afford, like the solar panels, Passivhaus certification, they were things that we really did want to do. And we really did want that quality of finish. So I think you can say to yourself, I'm not going to do it. But actually, once you're actually doing the build and really involved in that process, you've got to be very strong to not go with what your heart actually wants. So no, we stretched our budget definitely, and I think that's probably very, very common.
Yeah, I seem to remember even on my own build, we had one of these situations where you could theoretically downgrade the render, but it would just completely transform the building. And we thought, no, I think we'll just pay more for that.
Yeah, I think we simplified the tin. That was one of the things. We were going to have one of those flatter, more expensive versions. And we went for a more straightforward tin, which actually I think is really, really nice. And that fits in a very rural setting. So there are things that you can do that don't feel like that compromise, but other times you just think, oh God, I'm only doing this once, let's do it how we want it to be.
And who is going to build this then? How did you find a builder?
So again, we had looked for builders that we knew did eco builds, and we were going with one builder who then actually put us in touch with someone they worked with locally, who's Di Rees, the Passivhaus builder. And we were going to do it with them joined at one point, but in the end, Di did it directly for us, and he lives half an hour away. So he project managed, was the main contractor, main build, and then we had different contractors for groundworks and for the concrete that we did need.
So you mentioned about not going for Passivhaus certification, but someone like Di, very clued up.
Yes, and Josh in terms of, his design.
Good, strong team.
Yeah, so they knew they could get it pretty much to Passivhaus. We'd always had the MVHR designed into it because we knew we were going for as good as we could get. And then I think just at some point we decided, okay, we will go the whole way. And maybe we're getting such good results anyway. And then Josh did his certification trainings through the build.
So did you get it certified during construction? Well,
Yeah.
You'd have to obviously finish it, but what I mean is you made that decision.
Yes, we did. Yeah. I can't remember when, but at some point.
So that's quite interesting, though, in terms of, I imagine you would have got the same product when you've got people who have done. So what did you like about getting it certified?
That's a good question. I think maybe it is just you're testing your build in terms of you're reaching those standards. You just feel that you've then gone for as much as you could.
I think some of it is also for resale. I would say there's a big difference if you're not going to carry out any post-occupancy and actually get physical results for a building. Having it certified means something. It's a quality assurance.
Yeah, you've got that far. Becoming a Passivhaus then felt a good thing to do, really.
Can you remember any of the key challenges during construction?
So laying concrete and the Isocrete was probably our biggest, and that was partly getting concrete to site. So we had to have smaller delivery trucks rather than one large concrete mixer.
So that's access, is it? Because you've got quite good access. Admittedly, you've got to go around the houses a bit.
It's reasonable, but you can't get long wheel base So some of our wood was delivered to the farm up the road and actually telehandled down and things like that. So yes, the concrete was a bit of a nightmare because they didn't deliver it as fast as they should. And then the plant they were getting it from broke down halfway through. So they had to go to another place to get the rest of it. And we were laying what was our final floor as well. But the build itself was complete within 9 months.
And how much were you on site and checking over things, or were you just visiting once every couple of weeks?
We lived in a little bungalow nearby, so I was here or could be here every day. So I had communication with Di or with the groundswork team all the time, really. I would say that the first stage of the builds, you're not needed very much as a client, which was quite a surprise. You've been so engrossed in it all for such a long time. You know, the builder is following the architect's plans for all of the external work. And you sort of, get used to not really having very many questions. You're just having a look at things, maybe looking at the windows and stuff. And then suddenly it comes to the internal and you suddenly, oh, where are your stairs going? What stairs do you want? What's your electrics? Where do you want your sockets? Where's your lights? And suddenly you really are in demand and having to make decisions and, really thinking about the internal layout and structure. You haven't even got walls necessarily. So that's sort of quite a challenge to then think about those decisions.
And one of your key finishes in quite a few rooms is the clay plaster. So how did you settle on that?
I think we'd always liked the idea of something like that as an internal, but we also visited Old Holloway up the road in Little Birch when we were still designing the house, actually, because we were possibly going to use the system that he uses for the build, but he very generously showed us around. So he had quite an influence on some of our finishes, and we could see clay plaster in his house. So that was just a reality check of what it's really like. So that was a huge part of actually going to see another house that had done similar things. And as I say, he inspired us on quite a few aspects. So we can definitely acknowledge his help in that.
Were there any tricky bits to finish off? What took the most time?
All of the house is clay plaster, all of the internal finishes, which was some debate about whether you do some clay and some not. So it's on two different surfaces. So some is onto the wood fibre and some is onto sort of more of a straight board. So it's a big part of the finishes getting the clay plastering done. But then it's done. You don't have to paint unless you choose to. So basically, once all the plastering is done, that's it. Your house is decorated. We have put wall glaze on it to just stop it being dusty, but that's all. We did the kitchen ourselves, so that was probably more tricky.
So what does that mean?
We designed it ourselves, because it's a very simple open plan kitchen, and then my husband Colin and two very good friends helped actually install it. That was a good, tricky weekend to get it done.
But it's DIY kitchen, just using all the materials that you've sourced, or you've put in a kitchen
we bought it, so it's fitting it. Yes, no, it's not not completely construction.
When was the handover? When Di finished work on site then?
We started moving in September. Our other tricky thing was with the boiler, which had to be replaced. So I think that stopped our complete moving in. And he was still doing some bits and pieces, but it was definitely livable by that point.
So you've gone for an air source heat pump here.
Yes.
Is that what was replaced?
Yes, so all it's doing is heating hot water. And that was, again, something from Old Holloway that they had used. So we're using that same source. And it was just damaged, basically. It was damaged. So when the plumber put it in and started it, it was leaking. And at some point before it had arrived with us, it had been damaged during construction.
You were telling me too about your mini plant room.
Yes.
So maybe fill us in on that story.
So basically, we've probably got it makes me laugh, this plant room idea that it doesn't have plants, as in growing things in it.
You would want it in, wouldn't you?
So yes, it's very small, and Di was very much concerned that if anything went wrong with the boiler, we wouldn't get it out. So he said we need a removable wall, which is what he did. It's just basically a stud wall that can be removed. And then he had to remove it. So it was very, very well planned. And I think that was the lovely thing about the design process. As your builder is solving problems and coming up with solutions all of the time, actually. And that was what was really lovely. It's like we have a very strange shaped downstairs shower to just sort of fit in a very compact space, which caused quite a bit of headache of, well, how am I going to make a shower tray here? Because I can't buy one unless you want to spend a lot of money. So it's those things that you're solving as you go, with the help of a very, very good builder.
It's also interesting, you've got a little bit of double height space around the house. You've got the kitchen at the heart of the house. You know, what else would you describe about the finished product that you love?
So we wanted it to be open plan. So it was a sort of living space. So I suppose the kitchen goes onto the dining and to a small sitting space all as one. And the idea was that's the social space for the house. So it was lovely last Christmas. We had all the family here. You could be cooking and still part of everything that's going on. And that felt exactly what we wanted. And then if you want private space, that's either coming to bedrooms as a separate space. So we do have a chair in our bedroom. And then an office space that is more functional and actually can be more messy. So you can keep the sort of mess out of that central social space. We only got the external patio finished this August, so we haven't really had that chance to sort of really deal with the outside space as such yet and see how that functions. Because the idea is almost you can go round from each door of the house along the patio without having to go onto the garden at all. So just we haven't really experienced that bit yet of running round from one door to the next.
Well, I imagine that adventure will go on for a while. It's 5 years and counting on mine.
Is it?
But it's getting better. Each year it gets a little bit better.
Yeah, we've still got stuff to do, definitely.
What about the Passivhaus? Has it lived up to what you were expecting?
I think you have no concept of what it's going to be like to be in a passive house until you've lived in one, because it's just like everyone sort of says it's warm. And, you know, you're so used to having cold rooms in certain parts of your house, and then you heat them up, and then it might be too warm, and then you go out into the hall and it's cold. A passive house is just the same temperature throughout. So the whole space, in a sense, is livable and the same temperature. We are very geeky about it because we do constantly monitor the temperatures, internal, external temperatures. We have monitors all over the place. And you have to learn to manage it as well, I think, because it is so different and so new. So there's been no heating on in the house today. That's not always the case by any means. But it was 19 when we woke up this morning, and it's gone up to just about 20 just from us being here and having the oven on a bit.
Down to freezing overnight, were you last night?
Yeah, it was probably close to. So what we're finding is it drops 1 or 2 degrees overnight because it's not 100% efficient in keeping the temperature in. And then in the evening, when you're sitting down more, that's when you might want to have a bit of heating on just to sort of boost that temperature a bit more. And we just use an electric fire, and we have the towel rails, but that is all that we're pretty much using. And
the bills, does that also compare nicely? Not only downsizing, but,
yes.
but reducing too?
Yeah, definitely. I know. So obviously it's only electricity that we have. We export because we don't have batteries. So we're probably producing nearly twice as much and exporting twice as much as we're using. And we're getting some money back for that export of electricity.
Would you look at a battery? Is that something that could come down the line, or not really enough space?
Maybe. They're very expensive. So I don't know. I think it's still out on that. I don't mind exporting it in a sense, try and use it when we can, obviously, but we get a reasonable rate back. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you've got some visitors coming round tonight to me as well. So is this local eco group, is this incorporating housing as well, or is it just more your old background?
I think everyone is interested, and obviously Herefordshire has got quite a good line in passive house building, but we're looking at the sort of wider, how do you become resilient as a village? How do you make changes, I suppose, to how we're living that make us more sustainable in the long term and prepare for the changes that we're probably going to have to make. So there's a lot of interest just in that general caring about wildlife and nature, growing more of our own food, or, looking after gardens and things as well. It's harder for people to do the build side of things, or the renovations can be quite costly. We are lucky to do it from the start, I think.
Yeah, it is a lot easier. There is no doubt about that at all. So you've done very well. You've hit your passive house, but I mean, from a material point of view as well, you've low embodied carbon pretty much throughout the house, other than the foundations. Yeah,
and it's the Eyes Are Quick is then just gives you a tray of concrete, so that's your only concrete in the whole build. No steels or wood. I think it's pretty much negative, carbon.
And an efficient use of wood as well. You get value for money. Anything else that we haven't mentioned that is good in this conversation? Any advice for someone who might tackle a project like this?
I think you should try and enjoy the whole process. And I think there's something about really working with people that you have a good relationship with. And what I found lovely about doing an eco build is because people are doing that and are trained and that's what they're interested in, you're all trying to achieve the same thing. So you're all working together to achieve something. I don't think it's just a job for anybody doing this. There's a bit more of a meaning behind it for all concerned. And I think that makes for a really enjoyable process. Well, certainly that's what we've found.
And do you think you did particularly well in picking people? I don't know whether this is maybe a skill that we're uncovering here, perhaps because of your background. Because I think this has gone pretty well, this project, what I can tell from the outset.
Brilliantly. It has gone really well. And I think knowing we wanted it to be an eco house helped from the start, because then that's what we were looking for. And to some extent, you can say we were lucky to come across the right people. But I think it was then just trusting your gut about how you got on with someone, because I think that relationship is something that's going to go on for 9 months or whatever. I think putting that into your decision process is very important, because it's a process you're all going through for that length of time.
Well, it's a fantastic house that you've got here. Good story as well. Lovely to meet you, Janice.
You're very welcome, Ben. Thank you.
Head online to take a look at the show notes for this episode. You'll find them at houseplanninghelp.com/344. Lots of lovely images taking you right through the project. You can also check out our summary that we provide of the key learning messages through this, so you can take them on board for your project. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can do that within the show notes. Just head down to the bottom or on social media. We'll give you some links. And of course, we will link you back to Green Trace Architect. All of that at houseplanninghelp.com/344. My call to action is to check out the Hub. In fact, it is to give it a little taste. The Hub is a membership community that I run, and it's something that you don't have to do forever. You can dip in and out of it. So why not, if you haven't done it already and you're in the process of a project, it doesn't really matter what stage you're at. In fact, the earlier you are, probably the more sense it makes, because you can spend your time going through there. And we always find that the people that spend the most time and get the most engaged get the most out of it. I suppose that's a lesson of life as well. So we have things like our in-depth video case studies, our courses, our members-only forum, live training from different guest experts who come in and say hello. And of course, we've got Ask the Expert as Tresidor answering your questions. We're gearing up for another session with him. We keep these regular throughout the year, and we're hoping to add more guests as well in different areas of expertise. And we've got the office out with me, so you can have a chat, and I'll give you my thoughts on the project as well, just to throw it into the mix. Find out more at houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Sarah Lewis from the Passivhaus Trust is my guest. What is PHPP? You've probably heard it thrown around. We'll explore that acronym next time with the lovely Sarah. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.